Live from the Emerald City in Seattle, Washington, the UFO, Bigfoot, and paranormal hotspot of the Pacific Northwest. Directly to you, listening in around the world, this is Spaced Out Sunday, my friends. I'm your host, Michael W. Hall, the paranormal lawyer, occupying the captain's seat tonight for SOR headquarters. We welcome you tonight to tonight's show, including all of our listeners on the digital side in Revolutionary Radio. And don't forget, you can always find out our archives and see them for free on youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do us all a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to some Bumblefoot, shopping at our Spaced Out Radio store, and catching up on the SOR Newswire, and so much more. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by donating to Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. Tonight's guest tonight for the show, ladies and gentlemen, is David Collis. And we have an interesting show scheduled for you tonight regarding the historical figure of Jesus. How about that for a timely subject matter this Easter Sunday, April 12th, 2020. We are going to have a wonderful show talking about Jesus himself. If you wanted to sit down and talk with the man, maybe what would you ask him or want to know from him? And we're going to also talk about some other issues in the paranormal as well, UFOs. But to begin with, we have again our good friend and colleague Peter Davenport from the National UFO Reporting Center to pop on right away here on this Easter Sunday and just check in with us regarding potentially some UFO sighting reports and an issue that's very near and dear to Peter's heart, which is the passive radar system that he has developed decades ago to actually come across the abilities to allow us to find out if UFOs are flying over our very heads with a very inexpensive way to do this. So, first of all, David, welcome to the show. Are you there, David?
Michael.
There you go. No problem, buddy. I know you do a good job. You're just muting your microphone, so you just exactly like I told you to. But thank you for joining the show tonight.
This is exciting.
Well, we are going to get a lot of stuff in on your expertise as an author of the book Interviewing Jesus. But initially, we're going to, as we introduced you before the show, to our friend Peter Davenport from the National UFO Reporting Center, we're going to kind of bring Peter in for a few moments before we begin. So, Peter, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good evening, Michael, and good evening, David. It's delightful to be here with both of you.
Well, Peter, if you can do me a favor and get as close as you possibly can to that phone microphone, we will be able to get you on.
Better, Michael?
That's a little bit better. Yeah, thank you so much.
I can turn the volumes up maximum on my end.
Okay.
So,
Wonderful.
well, thank you for the invitation. As always, it's a delight to appear with you, Michael, the paranormal attorney, and nice to meet you tonight, David.
Thank you. Likewise.
And Peter, I know we're all hunkered down here on this unique Easter Sunday. It's very weird that we are in probably the most, social, one of the most social holidays of the year, when in reality most people would be going to church in their Sunday best, meeting all their relatives and friends, having people over for Easter dinner, and all of those kinds of things. And we're doing nothing of that this year. How have you survived the holiday today?
Well, I survived the holiday by doing a lot of UFO work and catching up with long overdue tasks in that field, and then going out for a long walk to enjoy the beautiful sunny day we had in eastern Washington this afternoon. So that's how my Easter went. My church, the church I attend in Harrington, Washington, had no service that I'm aware of, and not even over the internet. So it was a day devoted to work.
Oh, my. Well, at least we had a chance, I suppose, to be a little introspective here this Easter, so maybe that would be a good thing. But listen, we have been threatening to talk about your passive radar system for detecting UFOs for a long time, and I thought this might be a good time to bring myself and the audience and even David here up to speed on what you've come up with.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to talk about it, and thank you so much for the invitation to say a few words about it. But this is an idea I first proposed in late January of 1995, Michael, and I was excited about it. I had been running the hotline for just 4 or 5 months at that point, and I was exhausted by all the work. People have no idea how much work it amounts to. And I said to myself, there has to be a better way to detect UFOs than through the classic eyewitness or through the fuzzy photographs that we all get as investigators. And then it hit me quite suddenly that a few years earlier I had worked in the venture capital industry, and our company had been approached by a firm called Meteor Communications Corporation, located in Kent, Washington. It's about 20 or 30 minutes drive south of Seattle. And what they did, what they capitalized on, was building radio communications systems that capitalized on the ability to bounce a radio signal off the ionized trail behind a meteor. In other words, it would wait for a meteor to occur, and many, many meteors, of course, strike the Earth's atmosphere in every 24-hour period. It's about 1 billion or so, 10 to the 8th, 10 to the 9th meteors strike the Earth's atmosphere every day, and they create a cone of very, very hot or ionized gas, which is reflective of radio waves. And I said, that's the secret. We can detect, if this system can detect meteors and detect ionized trails behind them, why couldn't it detect something else, like a UFO? And that was the very beginning of my idea. And if people would like to read my paper, they can go to UFOcenter.com, my website, scroll down the home page, just one page, look at the left, and they can see a link to my paper that I wrote in preparation for the July 2004 MUFON Symposium, to which I had been invited. But to describe a system, Michael, if I may, it capitalizes on the ability to detect a reflected radio or television signal. In other words, as commercial radio stations in major cities broadcast their signal, it radiates out in all directions, of course, unless it strikes something that it would reflect off of. And that is the principle that my system is built on, is creating a receiver that listens for those reflected signals from above our heads. And the day, my little anecdote, if I may, Michael, and then I'll turn it over to you. The reason I'm convinced I'm on the right track is the day my paper written for the MUFON Symposium was published. I remember the date, actually. It was the 6th of July, 2004. I got a telephone call from a senior officer at the Central Intelligence Agency who's very well known in the UFO community. And he said, Mr. Davenport, you don't know me, but I know who you are. He said, a retired colleague of mine just sent me the abstract from your paper, And I'm calling to congratulate you and to say that if you build the system you describe in your paper, you will be successful in determining whether UFOs are real or not. He did not say he'll detect UFOs. He said, very probably so as to not violate a secrecy oath, he said, you will be successful in answering the question of whether UFOs are real or not. So that was the beginning of my proposal, and I think it will work. I've been trying to fundraise to raise money to build a prototype. To date, I have not convinced any wealthy investors to get involved in it, however.
Yes. Wow. I mean, that's so simple, it sounds like, Peter. The idea that you're using FM radio frequency towers that are already there anyway, and building a system that can differentiate the refracted signals from anomalous objects, it sounds like.
Yeah,
now,
exactly. And to give our listeners just a little bit more idea of what I'm proposing, I'm on the east side of the Cascade Mountains that run north and south up and down western Washington, run from Canada down to California, actually. And what I could do is build a receiver with a four-way antenna on the east side of those Cascade Mountains. So under normal circumstances, I would not be able to hear any transmitted commercial radio station or television station signal from the Seattle area, which is on the west side of the Cascades, unless there were something up above in the atmosphere that would reflect that radiated signal back down to the ground and strike my antennas and be recorded by the receiver. So if we can do that, that tells us that we will be able to detect UFOs on a real-time basis. We will not have to rely on, as I said earlier in my description, eyewitnesses or photographs. We can detect them on a real-time basis, and we can track them, measure their velocity, their altitude, to a degree their size. And as our listeners can probably tell, I'm very excited by this concept. And once we get a system built, it will resolve the question, as I mentioned earlier, of whether UFOs are coursing through our atmosphere or not. So,
well,
what I'd like to do.
David, what is your first impression upon hearing that idea of using these radio signals for detecting UFOs?
Okay, so I have a number of questions. So are the radio signals your signals that you would be sending up there, or are they just basic AM? Okay, so what you're doing is you're receiving, and you must have like a really super sensitive receiver to be able to do this. You're receiving the radiation bounce back. Is that what it is? Because everything that goes through, whatever that stream was, it would be going through, but there's still some that would be coming down or bouncing back. So you have to be able to differentiate between what is up there that's abnormal and that which is normal, correct?
And that is correct. And that's what computers do very well. For example, if it's doing 400 or 450 knots from Vancouver down to Portland, you know that it's probably an airplane. Or if it's 5,000 feet and it's doing 45 miles an hour, it's probably a flight of Canadian geese. But if the target is, for example, 50 miles above the surface of our planet, and it's doing 20,000 kilometers a minute, and it does a sudden right-angle turn, you know that's not a Canadian honker. It's not United Flight 273 to Portland. So that is the system I propose. And one thing I should have emphasized, David, and you homed in on it quite well, is the advantage of those mountains between the television or radio transmitter and the receiver is to block out the normal signal from that radio. Their line of sight signal, high frequency radio and television signals propagate pretty much along line of sight. They don't bend around corners. So under ordinary circumstances, if I tune my receiver to the same frequency of a television or radio station in Seattle, under ordinary circumstances, I would not be able to hear it. I would be able to hear it only if it were being reflected by something up in the atmosphere between me and the transmitter. That's the advantage of the system. And once you hear the signal, you can then process it, measure that, the location of the reflection point, say 10 times a second, and that will give you velocity at which the object is traveling.
And how many of these detectors do you need?
To cover the entire North American continent, fewer than 6.
Oh,
they reach out. I could tune a transmitter to a station in, say, San Francisco, and I could listen to it from eastern Washington. Under ordinary circumstances, since it's over the curvature of the Earth, I would not be able to hear it. But if anything passes through the atmosphere between here and San Francisco, it would reflect the radio or television signal you're tuned to, and I could hear that signal in eastern Washington. So that in a nutshell is my proposal, Michael, and
well,
I've assembled an engineering team and have a director of engineering. Now all we need is funding, and we can answer the question.
Well, that's
whether UFOs are real.
That's why we're talking about this live on Easter Sunday night. Maybe we can get some people out there that might be doing something other than listening to a late night radio talk show, and maybe they would be interested in pitching in and helping out in that regard. So obviously we will, if anyone contacts us at Spaced Out Sunday, we will refer them on to you. But of course, they can always go to UFOcenter.com and contact you at the National UFO Reporting Center.
Yeah, if they're interested in the technology or interested in being involved in the project with funding, I would welcome a call from them.
Well, that would be wonderful. I think that's a fantastic way that you explained this. It sounds so simple and easy to do and inexpensive in that regard as well.
Yeah, it is simple. It is relatively inexpensive. The only expensive part of what I have proposed is the writing of an estimated 2 to 3 million lines of computer code. It takes a lot of number crunching capability. And one point I should probably make to emphasize just how simple this is, there are a number of passive radars that operate around our country. And in fact, the U.S. Navy, which is charged with protecting the southern tier of the United States, for decades has used a passive radar system. And it's so old a technology, the first patent related to passive radar was applied for in England in 1927. And the English used the passive radar principle for detecting, during the Blitz, for detecting the location of enemy aircraft approaching from Germany. So it's a tried and true technology. It's well proven, and there's nothing complex about it.
Wow. Well, listen, we've got probably 4 minutes left. If you do have a sighting report or two you want to relay to us since last week, anything new come across your desk?
I do indeed. I have one happen to have it sitting right in front of me, Michael. This is an excellent report that came from a gentleman, ironically, after our conversation of passive radar. He's a radar specialist, or former radar specialist, for the U.S. Coast Guard. And on the 6th of 6th of April, this past Monday, he reports that he was at his home in Daytona Beach, and he was in the vicinity of the International Speedway in Daytona, and he saw, for about 5 or 6 seconds, he saw a wedge-shaped formation of tiny white lights about the size of a bright star or maybe a little bit bigger. The whole formation was about the diameter of a full moon, so it was a very prominent phalanx of lights in the night sky that streaked across the sky and just in an unwavering fashion. It was a striking, alarming sighting for this guy. I'd never seen a UFO, to the best of my knowledge, going from the south to the northeast over Daytona Beach, and they went directly over the roof of his house, he said, so he was in a very good position to be able to estimate the direction it was flying. But one thing he said, as he watched it, even for just 5 seconds, he was able to determine that 2 of the white lights on the lower arm of the wedge-shaped formation were out of position slightly and were maneuvering so as to restore themselves to a precise formation. It was a very dramatic sighting by a gentleman who sounds highly qualified as an observer. He said he's stood many watches in the course of his career in the U.S. Coast Guard, and he has a number of very special credentials that aren't given out for free by the Coast Guard. In other words, he's a very qualified observer, and I've talked to him twice, and he sounds like a very sane and sober-minded individual. So it's one of the better reports I've gotten in the recent past.
And it sounds to me that the sighting happened so quickly that he could rule out a flock of geese or birds traveling at normal slow speed.
Yep, and his impression was that clearly the lights in the formation were luminous, self-luminous. They were not reflecting ground light, for example. So it's, in my opinion, an excellent report. There were 9 individual craft in this V-shaped formation that just streaked over his head. He estimates he saw it for, I think he says 5 seconds.
Well, isn't that reminiscent of Kenneth Arnold's 9 discs that he saw over Mount Rainier? Interesting. Well, Peter, we have got to take a break here at the bottom of the hour, and then we will be coming back with David Collis, of course, and interviewing Jesus. But Peter, thank you for joining us at the first part of the show. I want to wish you a wonderful Easter and a holiday, rest of the holiday. And I'm hoping people will contact you if they have any leads on this passive radar funding that you're looking for.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the invitation as always, Michael. Nice to meet you, David. And I'm going to tune in to Spaced Out Radio here very quickly and start listening to your conversation with David. And thank you so much for the airtime and the ability to talk about passive radar, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome. We will talk to you again next week, I'm hoping.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, Spaced Out Radio fans. It's John Resnick, founder of the Chive and Chive Charities. Our goal is to make the life of veterans, first responders, and those with rare medical conditions 10% happier. We do this by donating one grant item, ranging from vans to therapy programs to prosthetic limbs, to those who need it most. To contribute to Spaced Out Radio's official charity, head over to chivecharities.org and become a donor today.
I'm feeling a little spicy tonight. What to do?
Why not get Bumblefuck?
4 million Scoville units of pure hard rock. Bumblefoot hot sauce is come in 3 flavors. The burning Bumble. Tone it down a bit with Bumblicious and throw the sauce on everything.
Spice it up. Bumble me, baby. Bumblefoot hot sauce. Get it today at kajans.com.
At spacedoutradio.com, we are keeping you up to date on all the news with the SOR Newswire. Captain Shirk leads the team that is bringing you the news of the day and exclusive stories on everything paranormal and supernatural. It's free to read, it's updated daily, and it's right there for you. The SOR Newswire is a one-stop shop for the news of the day. Check it out at spacedoutradio.com today.
Are you looking for great advertising value for your company? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. We have a multitude of places to get your name out there, including commercial ads during the show, special promotions, and banners on our website. Our audience is proven to support the companies that support our show. We can make your budget work for you. For more information, please contact us at sales@spacedoutradio.com.
Hey everybody, the SOR Space Travelers is open. For just $5 a month, you can hang out with Dave and our crew privately in our members-only section. With your signing, you'll receive newsletters on what's going on with Spaced Out Radio. You'll have direct contact with the host during the show in our chat, live streaming videos, and a great forum for your posts and more. Become a space traveler now at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you addicted to the woo? Good. Me too. This is Dave Scott, and you can woo it up with me every Monday through Friday, starting at 9:06 Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, for 3 hours of great entertainment in the subjects you love. UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, intuition. Yes, we hit it all 5 days a week. Look for us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, my friends, we own the night.
You wanted new SOR gear, and now you can have it. The SOR Vault is fully stocked with t-shirts, hats, hoodies, mugs, and everything in between with great logos for you to choose from. So head on over to spacedoutradio.com, click on the SOR Vault, and go shopping. Pricing is quite affordable, and you can look good representing your favorite show. So go to our website and pick up your new SOR wear at the SOR Vault today.
Need that weekend supernatural fix? Look no further than Spaced Out Saturday right here at spacedoutradio.com. I'm Stacey Edwards.
And I'm John Edwards. Each Saturday night, Stacey and I are going to bring you the best in paranormal, cryptids, UFOs, you name it, and we're going there.
It's all about the experience and to share the knowledge with all of you.
So tune us in every Saturday night on Spaced Out Saturdays, starting at 9:06 p.m. Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
From the heartlands of Canada to beards around the world, we know how to take care of you. Fill your follicles with the Mighty Moose Beard Oil. All our oils and balms are handmade and 100% natural ingredients because we care about your beard. And hey, use the promo code SOR2019 and get your Mighty Moose Beard Oil today. You can check us out on our website, mightymoosebeard.com.
We're adding to the entertainment online for Spaced Out Radio. I'm Amber Beckford, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out Cryptid Tales, where I will take you on a journey into some of the strangest legends and lore from around the world, relaying the stories to you of the strange creatures and experiences that people have had throughout time. You can find Cryptid Tales at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. And while you're there, don't forget to check out our free archives and leave a comment. See you there.
Cold drinks, great food, and the best music in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is the place to be, open until 2 a.m. nightly. Everything on the menu starts at just $6.95. Who serves food that cheap anymore? At the Moose, you'll never know who you'll run into. Rock stars, actors, athletes. It's the place everyone wants to be. So join us at the Moose Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver, the official party bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Hello everyone, this is Ryan Stacy from the Experiencer Support Association, otherwise known as TESSA. We're glad to team up with Spaced Out Radio to help investigate your experiences on the SOR Sightlines Report. Together, we'll investigate the strange sightings and occurrences you've had. We're looking for answers just like you. So fill out a Sightlines Report on the Spaced Out Radio website and let's figure out what's going on together.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to Spaced Out Sunday. This is your host, Michael W. Hall, the paranormal lawyer, and we're coming to you from the Emerald City in Seattle, Washington, up here in the Pacific Northwest for Spaced Out Radio. Now, if you could sit down with Jesus of Nazareth and talk with him, what would you want to know? What would you ask? What would you want to know more than the theological perspective, or is the Christian narrative satisfying enough for you? Interviewing Jesus is an authentic, groundbreaking portrayal of a man who dedicated his life to the Father. It is a refreshing one-on-one conversation written by the author and Jesus at the same time. The hopes, aspirations, and influences of Jesus are investigated while new and intimate details are revealed. The book sheds light on Jesus' family, his missing years, the Father, John the Baptist, his ministry, and final days in Jerusalem during the Passover. This book culminates with Jesus' impassioned, painful, and heartbreaking crucifixion account, and one feels what he felt, sees what he saw, and hears what he heard with every twist and turn during the interview with Jesus that my guest, David Collis, has written. David, thank you for being with me on the show tonight.
Well, thank you, and happy Easter. I mean, isn't that appropriate?
Yes, it is, David. This is just a fascinating time of the year. As we were talking with Peter, the idea that Easter is one of our more social holidays where, you know, everybody, their friends, relatives, family, and co-workers get together typically, celebrate the resurrection of a man that lived on the planet who was attributed to being God himself as well, who was crucified during that week-long Passover period of time in Jerusalem during Palm Sunday to the Sunday of today, and the resurrection. So I am real excited to talk with you about what your resources or research has come up with in this regard, the idea that you are coming at this idea of Jesus at a different kind of angle than most people, I believe.
That's correct. So my interest is trying to understand Jesus, the man, and his personality and the types of decisions that he had to make versus the ones that are most common from a theological point of view, that he's the Son of God, that he's the Son of Man, that he's the Messiah, the Redeemer, the sacrificial lamb, and as Paul would describe him as the second Adam. I saw all those as archetypes, and I saw those as all symbols, and I felt like there was more to them. So it's almost like those I felt like were masks, and I wanted to understand the person behind the mask.
Oh, that is fascinating. Very interesting. You're basically doing some historical forensics, it sounds like.
Let me tell you, there was a show that I saw about FBI profiling, and in this particular series, the FBI profiler was tasked to find the Unabomber, and he analyzed the Unabomber's sayings and his writings to determine a new personality profile that the FBI could use to look for a new source. And I found that what he did was almost identical to what I did. So I laid out everything of Jesus's sayings and laid them out, put them in categories, subcategories, counted everything, and then started breaking everything down.
Oh, that's wonderful. Definitely, because the whole idea of that figure of Jesus, literally coming kind of out of nowhere for 3 years in a short time ministry, making such a large impact, and literally not a whole lot of his sayings were let's put it this way, his sayings were attributed to him by other people. He did not write his own gospel as well, from what I can gather. And so what you're doing is putting together the forensic evidence in the record of what people had said about him, it sounds like.
Well, so there were several components to this. One is that I had to rely on some sources, and so the first source that I relied on was the scholars from the Jesus Seminar, and they spent quite a bit of time determining which sayings of Jesus seemed to be most Jesus and those that are less Jesus. So they had a ranking. They had a 4-colored ranking. Red was most authentic of his, pink were most likely his, gray was, well, maybe, and black were definitely not. So when I was going through and looking at all of his sayings, I was looking through the sayings that they felt were most consistent with the type of person that Jesus was. So I looked at all of those sayings, and this is what was fascinating. I developed 25 pages of his sayings. So when you really start to stop and think about that, we're looking at somebody who is talking on a lot of different subjects and a lot of different ways that he was presenting this information. And I collected essentially 25 pages worth of his sayings, and that made me think that there was something else that was going on here, and that is that somebody had to be recording this, because it seemed too illogical for me that you can just remember roughly 25 pages worth of sayings, unless you had, very photographic memory.
Yes, good point. And of course, there were scribes in those days and disciples and all that kind of stuff. But it's you know what? I relay this to the idea of the Admiral Wilson's smoking gun memo right now that's 15 pages long and seems to be just a transcript of a conversation that lasted for an hour and 10 minutes. And the fact that this is so detailed, this UFO memo of the century, they call it, lends me to believe that there was indeed some digital recorder that was actually taking down this script as it was being said. Otherwise, no one could have remembered the text in that regard. And so you're doing the same thing forensically in history, going back and taking the verified statements of Jesus of Nazareth and finding out that these things are so detailed that something had to be going on at that period of time.
Yeah, so you have two options. You have somebody writing these down, or you have Jesus saying them so often that it just was seared into everybody's memories. But that doesn't make sense to me either, because people tend to forget. So he would have had to have said a lot of things over and over and over again, which I believe that he did. But then when you get into these more complicated parables that, they are, as a word count, you'd start getting up into, several hundred words that seemed to me that would be too hard to remember on the fly.
And given the fact that in reality, he was only preaching for 3 years, right?
That's what it says.
Fascinating stuff. The idea that word for word, verbatim, these things are written down, even though he might have repeated them multiple times over a short period of time. It wasn't as if he was generation after generation, telling these stories to different people, as they grew up and stuff. But maybe, David, you could start for us at the beginning of explaining a little bit about some of the material that we're using. You mentioned the Jesus Seminar. Can you kind of enlighten us of what that was, basically?
Okay, so the Jesus Seminar are the New Testament scholars, and I think there were 100 of them, who got together, and one of the things that they wanted to determine was the authenticity of Jesus' sayings. And like I said earlier, they took all of his sayings and they color-coded it, and every one of the scholars had to put essentially a color associated with that saying. So it was either red, or it was pink, or it was gray, or it was black. And they had to determine what would be the likelihood of Jesus saying this particular saying or phrase. Like, so it seems they all agreed that when he would say, those who have ears to hear and eyes to see, that seems to be the most consistent saying of Jesus that they can authenticate as true. And then you start going down with all the others. And so that was what they were interested in doing. And then this whole kind of New Testament theology and New Testament breaking down and deconstruction has been going on, and the Germans were very good at this back in the 1800s. And part of that early historical kind of understanding of Jesus and his sayings also kind of tied into which Gospels were written first. And so there was a consensus of German scholars back in the 1800s that determined that the Gospel of Mark was the first Gospel. And what's interesting about this particular Gospel is that it appears as though Jesus's sayings are the primary force that's moving this gospel forward. And so there were pearls strung, in a sense, along the way, in which there was a lot of his sayings, and then there would be Jesus moving and doing something, and then there would be a lot more sayings, and then it would stop, and then they would talk about Jesus doing something or walking somewhere. There was some type of action. And then they started realizing that in between all of Jesus's sayings was Jesus's actions. And then they started to think that there might have been some other earlier source material that was primarily a collection of Jesus's sayings that the gospel writers were using to write the gospels. And that early gospel is called Quell.
Right.
Quill.
Yes. And isn't that interesting to think that there is another source for these gospel testimonies? Like you mentioned, Mark being the first gospel that was created not more than 40 years after Jesus' death, if I'm not correct.
They're looking at that as the Gospel of Mark was written somewhere around the year 70, plus or minus a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then when you get into Luke and Matthew, they are another 20 or 30 years after that. And then when you get into the Gospel of John, we're looking at another 20 to 30 to 40 years after that as well. But let me just mention this. And this is also a really fascinating point. So the scholars very early, several hundred years ago, 100 years ago, realized that there seems to have been what they refer to as a Q document, just Jesus' sayings. And lo and behold, when the Nag Hammadi library was discovered back in out there in the Egyptian desert in the 47 or 48, there was a Gospel of Thomas in which this particular gospel was nothing but sayings. And that kind of confirmed this idea and this theory that there might have been, and there should have been, and there probably was a Q document, because it was just a collection of sayings.
Wow, isn't that interesting? The idea being that Q could have been a separate individual, right?
Well, they just used the word Q, and that just meant quill. So there must have been somebody that was writing down Jesus' sayings.
Yes.
Now, but that doesn't, so that then begs the question, what about all the different stories? So you're starting to see lots of stories that are interjected in between the sayings. And so there also must have been some source for the stories as well. So when you read Luke and when you read Matthew, you're going to see that there is some overlapping of the sayings and of the stories, but then there's going to be some stories that you're not going to see in other Gospels, which is, that itself is also kind of fascinating.
Well, exactly. As a matter of fact, it sounds, I believe it's Mark of all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Mark is the only Gospel that does not discuss Jesus' resurrection. Is that right?
Well, okay, so Mark does something in which you have, if you kind of just think of this in terms of a timeline, Mark seems to start off his gospel right at the moment that Jesus sees John the Baptist, and then it ends with, I believe it's the crucifixion.
Yes.
And so, I haven't read this in a while, but anyway, so I might be wrong here. But anyway, you don't have a lot of the other part of the story, which is the resurrection and the tomb and the rolling of the stone. Okay, when you get into Matthew and you get into Luke, we're going to start seeing more information on both ends of that story. So there's new bookends.
Which could be coming from that Q source as well, maybe then filling in some of the blanks.
Well, or there were other stories that got to Matthew and Luke that were not with Mark. And that's possible because they were in different locations. So Mark seems to have been down in Alexandria, Egypt, and Matthew and Luke, you know what, I don't have the exact information of like where these were written, but obviously Luke was Paul's closest confidant, and so he's gathering a lot of information from Paul, I think, but he's also using other sources that seem to be related to the sources Matthew's using, Q and Mark.
Yeah. But of course, I understand Mark was the earliest gospel, right? So
well, and now, but we're thinking that Q went even earlier than that.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of account for 40 years. So somewhere between the end of Jesus's life and the first gospel, we're looking at somewhere around 40 years, plus or minus a few years.
Wouldn't it be interesting if Q turns out to be Mary Magdalene?
Wouldn't that be fabulous?
Oh, my.
Oh, in the gospel, there are gospels out there that are not part of the canon that suggest that Mary Magdalene had a very special relationship with Jesus, and the disciples are upset and they're jealous that Jesus gives her more information than they get, and more of the mystery and more of the hidden secrets that they never really got.
Yes. Yeah, and of course, Mary Magdalene was the first to see the tomb empty and to see the risen Christ at that point afterwards.
That's right.
And had to go to tell the disciples.
That's right. And she was also, you don't hear too much about her until the very end of Jesus' story. There is just one thing in Luke. It's called Luke chapter 8, verse 2 and 3, in which Luke is mentioning the women of means, and Mary Magdalene is mentioned at that point. And she's kind of sprinkled around a little bit more, I think. And then you find, she's just really heavy at the very end of the gospel.
Yeah. And I've heard it say that Mary really took a bad shot during the Nicene Convention later on by the Roman Church. When they put together the Gospels, they kind of like scrubbed her out in a lot of places.
Yeah, she got a bad rap.
That's just fascinating stuff. I just love this. Well, we've got about 3 minutes to go until the top of the hour break, but I think what I'd really like to get from you, if you'd like to go there, is kind of start talking about Jesus's life and what it was like. the research that you've come up with on what this person, Jesus of Nazareth, was really about.
Well, one of the things that I was trying to determine was what kind of personality he had. And then the other thing that I was very interested in is what is the social context? So what was going on during the Roman occupation, and why was there such a strong desire for people to be seeking a Messiah? What was going on that would be kind of like the default setting when things go bad? Look for the Messiah. Why is that happening? So that was kind of what I was trying to do when I was looking at Jesus. But I also had a very different understanding. I've had types of mystical experiences, and I had one that was very profound. And in the East, they call it enlightenment. And when I had that experience, I looked at Jesus from a very different point of view, and I realized that he himself had to have had some type of experience like that, which informed him very differently. And from that perspective, I was able to look at Jesus and see him in a very, very new light, that there was something specific happened to him that gave him, this incredible insight. And I can, there's definitely on the backside of this, the break, we can talk more about that. It's a very fascinating story.
Oh, that does sound fascinating. In other words, there was some kind of epiphany even in Jesus's life as a young man?
I am totally convinced. When I was going through and I was trying to, getting through the theology of the New Testament was one of the most challenging of all of the things that I had to do. And so I had to chip away, little by little, what the theology is. And so I had to just keep breaking it down. And I asked myself a couple of questions, and one of them was, would Jesus would he have had mystical experiences before the Transfiguration? And my answer was yes. And with that, it just, it really kind of opened it up. And then I asked the question, what would be most logical? Did Jesus know the Father before he went to John the Baptist, or was it when he went to John the Baptist?
Oh, good point.
So I started to ask these questions. When would something have happened?
Yeah.
How much can you learn on the job? What did you bring to the table before you started your ministry?
Oh, very good.
To go through every single item and ask that question. Is this before John or after John?
Oh, wonderful. Well, we're going to be right back, and we're going to answer those questions, or at least pose them in the next hour. So hang on, and we will be right back on Spaced Out Sunday.
Looking for creative ways to get your company out in the public? How about advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Our sales department is waiting to hear from you, and we can work around any budget. From commercial spots to banners to special promotions, there are many opportunities to get your name and product out to our SOR listeners. For a price guide and more information, please contact us at sales@spacedoutradio.com.
If you like it hot, real hot, then heat up your meals with Bumblefoot hot sauce.
Get your Bumblefoot hot sauce today. The sauce, Bumblelicious, and the 4 million Scoville unit. Bumble, we're going in hot, real hot, coming out even hotter.
Keep the milk nearby. And tantalize your taste buds tonight.
Bumblefoot hot sauce, available now at kajans.com.
Get your horns up with me on Spaced Out Radio. This is Ron Bumblefoot Thal. Come tune in to SOR where you can hear me rock out with Little Brother Is Watching, the official theme song of Spaced Out Radio. And then come on over to bumblefoot.com where you can find out about my tour schedule, my music, and everything else. Bumblefoot.com keeps you up to date on what I'm doing and the best way to stay in touch with my music and music camps. Sign up for my newsletter at bumblefoot.com and remember, Little Brother Is Watching.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
The SOR Vault is open for business, and do we have some cool swag for you to pick up? All you have to do is head over to our website and click on the SOR Vault. You have a variety of cool logos to choose from, and put them on anything you want. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, coffee mugs, you name it, we can get it to you. So do your shopping by supporting the store you love. Get your Spaced Out Radio swag at the SOR Vault today.
Hey everyone, I'm John Edwards.
And I'm Stacey Edwards. Together we're taking over Saturday nights on Spaced Out Radio, where we're going to bring our own experiences of the paranormal and talk to the best people we can find to help bring you answers to your strange tales.
We're here to entertain your need for weekend. Woo! So tune us in at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9:06 Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, where we can all get a little spooky together.
Spaced Out Saturday nights right here at spacedoutradio.com.
We are scouring the world for the most intriguing stories of your day. Take the time to read up on the SOR Newswire, where our team, led by Captain Shirk, will deliver to you some of the best paranormal and supernatural news, along with some stories that will blow your mind from the weird to the wacky. It's the news outside the news that piques interest, and that's what we're looking to deliver to you. The SOR Newswire, only at spacedoutradio.com.
We all know on Spaced Out Radio we love a good beard and mustache, so why not take care of your facial hair with Mighty Moose Beard Oil? Made in Canada, we're taking care of beards and stashes around the world. We use 100% natural ingredients with our oils and balms to make your whiskers feel silky smooth. Use promo code SOR2019 at MightyMooseBeard.com today.
Hi, this is Amber Becker, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we store all of the SOR show archives for free. And as an added bonus, every 2 weeks I'm posting brand new content on Cryptid Tales, where I will get into some of the spookier legends and folklore from around the world, and tell the stories that go with them. Find us at youtube.com/spacedoutradio and check out Cryptid Tales today. Drop a comment and let me know what you want to hear. See you there.
Are you an experiencer of something strange that can't be explained? Do you want help finding out what's going on? I'm Ryan Stacy, head of the Experiencer Support Association, otherwise known as TESA. We've teamed up with Spaced Out Radio to investigate cases filled out in the SOR Sightlines report. We are independent and there's no cost to what we do. All we need is your experience. Let's find out what's happening together on the SOR Sightlines report.
Hey, space travelers, this is John Resnick, founder of the Chive and Chive Charities. If you know anything about our website, you know we like to do things a little different. We're not some faceless organization collecting money for a nebulous cause. Our donor dollars go directly toward life-improving items. Then we give those items directly to an underdog who needs it most. To become a donor with Spaced Out Radio's official charity, Chive Charities, just go to chivecharities.org/donate.
For the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. The Space Travelers Club is a place where you can interact with other listeners, either live during the show or on our great forum. We want your stories, pictures, comments, and ideas. You'll get live video streams, exclusive content, and be a part of our newsletter. Stay in touch with everything SOR. The Space Travelers Club is just $5 a month at spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott, and I'm bringing you the Woo every Monday through Friday on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going all out to bring you the strangest, oddest stories and subjects I can find for your entertainment. Why? Because when we hit peak Woo, I know I've done my job. So come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com, 9:06 Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, and together, my friends, we own the night.
And we are back with Spaced Out Sunday on this wonderful Easter Sunday night. And thank you for being with me on an interesting holiday weekend. The idea that we literally are hunkered down in our own quarters, fighting to be safe against this coronavirus and all the other interesting things that have been thrown at us here in the last few weeks and months, and we are surviving, that's for sure. So thank you for being with me. This is Michael W. Hall, your paranormal lawyer, and this is Spaced Out Sunday. But boy, are we having fun tonight with a very unique guest and very timely guest tonight, Mr. David Collis, and we are talking about Jesus, the historical figure, and his book called Interviewing Jesus. David, where can people find your book? That would be fascinating for them, I'm sure, if they wanted to buy it.
The best place to go is to go to Amazon. I have a print version, I have an ebook version, and I have an audio version. So whatever suits your needs, I have it. And it's Interviewing Jesus, the man, and my name is David Collis.
And of course, I'm wondering, did you do your own voiceover for the audiobook?
I did.
Wonderful. Well, you have a great voice, great diction, and very conversational tone. So it's always nice to hear the actual author who wrote the book.
Oh, is in the audio version?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a challenge. Like the whole book was a challenge. All the research was a challenge, and then the editing was a challenge. I mean, the whole process was a challenge, and then I got to deal with the marketing side of things, and that became the real challenge.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it's almost like birthing a child and then raising it up into That's adulthood. Right. Yeah. Oh, fascinating stuff. Well, gosh, we were talking initially before the break about some fascinating ideas of the idea of what did Jesus bring to the table regarding his ministry prior to being baptized by John the Baptist. Why don't you take over there and kind of lead us in that direction?
Okay, so I kind of want to step back a little bit. And I talked earlier about this epiphany, this experience that I had. And at the time that I had it, I was reading the Gospel of Thomas. And prior to this experience, I could barely understand the concepts that were being explored in the Gospel of Thomas. And Jesus is the central figure, as well as his disciples that we are aware of. And Mary Magdalene is in that Gospel as well. And after this experience, I seemed to understand quite a bit more, like almost all of it. And from there, I was able to present a 4-part lecture series at the Unity Church in my neighborhood. And there I was able to explore the type of person that would be making these statements. And just as importantly, I was interested in trying to understand the recipient. Who would be the people receiving this information? And it dawned on me that this type of information is like calculus. So if you're not ready for calculus, you're not ready for this material. You're just not going to get it. So that meant to me that there had to have been some initiation or some other initial stages and steps somebody had to go through to get to the point where they are now capable of understanding the material that Jesus is purported to provide. At the same time, I'm now looking at this at Jesus from a completely different angle and asking myself, who is this person? And how do I really understand this person? And how does this person arrive at these conclusions and say the things that he is saying in the Gospel of Thomas? And that made me really excited. Now I realize there's a puzzle that I wanted to solve. So when I got to the point where it was time to write the book, after I've done a lot of research, I thought I'm going to take the same model that you see in the Gospel of Thomas, which is just sayings of Jesus. There's no narration, there's no story, there's no resurrection, there's no birth, there's no death, there's none of that. It's just Jesus' sayings. So I started to compile the sayings based off of the Jesus seminar, and as I got to the last couple of sayings, particularly the parables, I had another epiphany, and the epiphany was that I am reading, what I am looking at is the autobiography of Jesus. I am looking at his personal experiences, and Jesus's personal experiences are embedded into his wisdom sayings. So from there, I was able then to ask a lot of questions. So what is he telling me? What is he saying? What would be his personal experiences for him to arrive at all the conclusions that he arrived at? So with that, I then had to start reverse engineering his life. We know where he ended. He's at he has his ministry, and then he has his death. But what happens before he starts his ministry? What went on? So as I went through all of those sayings, I started to look and realize that he seems to be inspired by several different sources. And I'll give you 6 sources. There is your ancient Hebrew tradition, so he has a very strong understanding of his history. He's inspired by the Essenes. He's inspired by Greek philosophy, and he's inspired by Greek rhetoric. So his parables and his rhetoric, or his aphorisms, have a very strong Greek rhetorical style. Then you jump over and you say there's some influence that he has with Egypt. And then you go further east and you're saying, well, here is a lot of Buddhism in his sayings, here's Hinduism in his sayings, here's Confucianism in his sayings, and here's Taoism in his sayings. Well, how do you get all of that information into your sayings without going there? I mean, do you go to some school and you learn all of this? That didn't make any sense to me. However, he might have had to go to one type of academy and then to another and then to another and then to another. And he probably had to spend a lot of time in the Far East. So that was the way that I started to look at this. And then I started to break things down. Like, what is the Father? Who is the Father? How is this different? How and why is this different than Adonai, Yahweh, Elohim, those kind of concepts? Where does why is he talking in these very peculiar kingdom of heaven sayings? They're very different than what you would see in John the Baptist. John the Baptist would say the kingdom of heaven is right around the corner, or it's near. Paul says, we're all going to go to the kingdom of heaven, so it's a kind of a place. And Jesus, when he's speaking in the kingdom of heavens, he's speaking in a very strange language, like, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, or a treasure, or a pearl, or that it's within you. There's the unmerciful servant, there's the strong man, there's workers in the vineyard. I mean, these are very peculiar ideas, so where are they coming from? And so I started to realize, if I start breaking those sayings down, what kind of person is saying these things, and where is this person coming up with these ideas? And so the first thing that I said was he's having personal experiences about these ideas, and I just mentioned the sources where he's now seems to be inspired by or he's influenced by. And then I started to break down his personality, and I saw that he was compassionate, he was a troublemaker, he was an entrepreneur, which was a very strange and interesting term. He was a provocateur, he seemed very determined, he was enigmatic, he was a teacher, he was a genius, he was a mystic, he was really tough, and he was a poet. And then I started to kind of break it down even further, and I started to realize that Jesus had an open heart. He had an open mind. He was able to overcome the needs of the body. And in my book, I talk about the feats of endurance. And so 40 days out in the desert was one. The ministry and the demands of the ministry was another. And then his final, phase in his life, which was being handed over to the Romans to be scourged and then crucified, was another feat of endurance that he had to overcome. Jesus was courageous, brave, and fearless, and he performed miracles. So how does all of that add up? And that's where I started to really kind of have to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, David, you now are really piquing my interest in the whole idea of, when people I think of Jesus of Nazareth, you think of an itinerant preacher walking wherever he went, maybe not traveling very far from where he was born. But in reality, you're giving me an impression that he might have been quite well traveled. He might have been maybe a little bit more than itinerant. Does Joseph of Arimathea figure into the idea of Jesus's education in his early years?
Well, it says that Joseph was his uncle, and it wouldn't surprise me, based off of the family connections, that Joseph might have had some hand in Jesus's education. There, it says in the Gospels that when Jesus was born, that his mother and father fled down to Egypt with Jesus, and so the idea of traveling at the very early stage of Jesus's life was another one of those key ingredients of his ministry that made me ask, why was traveling so important to you in your ministry? I mean, when you go over to the Essenes, they had Qumran there at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and if you look at the Greek academies and those teachers, you're seeing that there is essentially a shop, a classroom that was built or organized in which people went to the educator. And Jesus reversed the process. He's the educator, and he's going to the people. So Jesus seems to be very comfortable moving around. That idea of moving around and traveling was another one of those ingredients that I had to ask myself, where does Jesus get this idea?
Yeah, the idea that I would imagine in those days, unless you were extremely motivated, you did not probably travel very far from your home. Maybe for certain religious holidays, you would, make trips, that kind of thing. But the whole idea that you're talking about, potentially Jesus being involved with the Essenes as well, does that come up with your research?
Yeah. So when I was reading Josephus and getting the first century history of Judea, and he talked about the Essenes, and he has a whole list of ideas that the Essenes are involved in. And when I compared that list with Jesus's list, I just started seeing that there's this very strong overlap. But then you start seeing where the break is, and you ask yourself, why is there an overlap? And then two, why is there a break? So I had to answer those kind of questions. But let me just kind of mention something. There's a lot here. There's so much here. It's really exciting. So based off of Jesus's sayings and what is being said in Jesus's sayings, I then developed a backstory to Jesus. And I also kind of was able to take that information and then compare it with the early gospel accounts. So just, to prep you, and as you know, you have Jesus's birth, then you have Jesus as a 12-year-old boy going to the temple, and then you have Jesus showing up on John the Baptist's front door at the Jordan River. So there's not a lot of material that we know or that we have of Jesus's life prior to his ministry. There's just very small fragments, but at least with those fragments, there's some detail there. So this is what I've been able to determine, and this is kind of the personality profile that I developed. So one, Jesus was born into a devoted and a pious family, and that family had connections. Jesus's family seemed to be wealthy, and I'm not going to say super wealthy, but they seemed to be wealthy, and they either owned some type of plantation or a construction business, or they were merchants of some way, in some manner. And because when I broke down Jesus's sayings that dealt with money, there are four major subcategories. There is the agricultural product, the cash crop kind of product. You have the merchant mentality. You have one who's working with their hands, and then you also have one who is inheriting something. So with those sayings, money sayings, we're seeing those four paradigms within that, and so that made me go back to the idea that Jesus is speaking from experience. Why is he speaking so eloquently and so knowledgeably about money? So when you really break down those sayings, we're hearing a man talk about capital investment, capital return, taxes, bad management, good management, labor disputes, labor wages, all of that. And that to me seemed very sophisticated. So that made me believe that Jesus came from a wealthy family. So also Jesus, I refer to him as an entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs are selling a product and they're promoting their product. And Jesus is invested in the same way with the Father as an entrepreneur would with a particular widget that they're selling. It seemed to me that Jesus had a very strong sense of destiny, that he was going to do something special with his life. I surmise that somewhere between the age of 14 and 17, he left home, to get a further education. Jesus seems to have studied and learned and practiced some very deep spiritual wisdom, and he was exposed to some of these deep mysteries. And based off of the influences, it's not unlikely that he went to the East. And then from that, I've been able to identify four very profound experiences that he had. And one, as I mentioned earlier, that he had some kind of spiritual experience, a very profound experience of the Father, of enlightenment, of other beings. Two, he was robbed and he was beaten. Three, he seemed to have had an early sexual encounter that shamed him. And three, he seems to have gone through the proverbial hell in which he started to loathe himself and life and the world and God. And he was, that's kind of like the proverbial hell that one would go through. And he felt despised and wretched. And he recognized the ugliness of mankind. And then the last thing that I was able to determine is that when Jesus returned home, his family, or at least some of his family, was reluctant to accept him back into it.
Wow. Would that have included some of his brothers?
Yeah, particularly James. So in my book, I explore the family dynamic and try to understand one of Jesus's personality traits is that of a mystic, and he's a very, very good storyteller, and he seems to have an openness about him, and he's also he confronts and he likes to flip tables. And then when you read about his brother James, you see that he seems to be very the straight and narrow kind of a person. So I started to explore the relationship that he and James had. and Jesus was kind of the black sheep maverick of the family, and James was more of the rock of the family. And then I had to look at his mother and his father, and I started to think that his mother, with the experiences that she had with God and the angels, that Mary had a more mystical side to her, and that Jesus's father, Joseph, was referred to as a righteous man, so he kind of had more of the law and more of the person who was always very honest and filled with integrity and would conduct his business in a way that was very wholesome. So we see that reflected in Jesus's ministry. And we also see his mother reflected in his ministry with the mysticism.
Yeah. You wonder, in certain paranormal experiencers' families, you see the same thing where potentially one father or mother or side of the family has more of that woo-woo factor than some of the others. And it sounds to me you're fleshing out for us the fact that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was that line of mystic. Maybe his stepfather, Joseph, was not. But then, of course, his siblings, like you say, James, was raised very differently. Very fascinating.
Well, I don't know if he was raised differently. I think he just was cut from a different cloth, which was more of the practical side of things. So here's this is where you really have to explore this a little deeper, and that is Jesus. Jesus came from a wealthy family. In fact, Luke says that his mother was one of the women of means that followed him. So when Jesus decides to go off and conduct his ministry, who's taking care of the family business? Well, the next in line, Jesus is the oldest of the siblings. The next in line was, somebody like James. Oh. So was he ready to handle the responsibility of the family estate?
Yeah.
Is that what he really wanted to do? And again, here's kind of Jesus. You think about the nature of those who are very practical in what they do, and Jesus decides, well, I'm going to go out and go conduct this ministry, and his family thought he was crazy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fascinating way to put it in a unique family dynamic there. Listen, we've got to take another break at the bottom of the hour here. We will be right back with my special guest tonight, David Collis, and we're talking about Jesus the Man. And we'll be right back on Spaced Out Sunday.
Cold drinks, great food, and the best music in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is the place to be, open until 2 a.m. nightly. Everything on the menu starts at just $6.95. Who serves food that cheap anymore? At the Moose, you'll never know who you'll run into. Rock stars, actors, athletes. It's the place everyone wants to be. So join us at the Moose Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver, the official party bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Hey, Space Travelers, this is John Resnick, founder of the Chive and Chive Charities. If you know anything about our website, you know we like to do things a little differently. We're not some faceless organization collecting money for a nebulous cause. Our donor dollars go directly toward life-improving items. Then we give those items directly to an underdog who needs it most. To become a donor with Spaced Out Radio's official charity, Chive Charities, just go to chivecharities.org/donate.
Hello, this is your guitar man, Ron Bumblefoot Thorn. I have to tell you, I love the response I get from Little Brother Is Watching from Spaced Out Radio fans. It's amazing how music can inspire and make people think deeper about what's going on in the supernatural world. You can head over to my website, bumblefoot.com, to check out my music, my guitar workshops, my touring, even check out some of the hot sauces that I'm working on. And make sure you keep on listening, because with Spaced Out Radio, you know Little Brother Is Watching.
we're adding to the entertainment online for Spaced Out Radio. I'm Amber Beckford, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out Cryptid Tales, where I will take you on a journey into some of the strangest legends and lore from around the world, relaying the stories to you of the strange creatures and experiences that people have had throughout time. You can find Cryptid Tales at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. And while you're there, don't forget to check out our free archives and leave a comment. See you there.
Hey everybody, the SOR Space Travelers is open. For just $5 a month, you can hang out with Dave and our crew privately in our members-only section. With your signing, you'll receive newsletters on what's going on with Spaced Out Radio. You'll have direct contact with the host during the show in our chat, live streaming videos, and a great forum for your posts and more. Become a space traveler now at spacedoutradio.com.
Looking for something new to push your limits? Look beyond the spectrum. A new docu-series featuring some of the best researchers in the world when it comes to everything from UFOs, government cover-ups, and strange humanoids. Truth seekers Stephen Bassett, Jeff Meldrum, Jack Kasher, and Stan Friedman, among others, all chip in to bring their knowledge to you. Beyond the Spectrum can be found on Amazon as well as Tubi TV. Tell us what you think on our Amazon page.
Are you looking for great advertising value for your company? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. We have a multitude of places to get your name out there, including commercial ads during the show, special promotions, and banners on our website. Our audience is proven to support the companies that support our show. We can make your budget work for you. For more information, please contact us at sales@spacedoutradio.com.
At spacedoutradio.com, we are keeping you up to date on all the news with the SOR Newswire. Captain Shirk leads the team that is bringing you the news of the day and exclusive stories on everything paranormal and supernatural. It's free to read, it's updated daily, and it's right there for you. The SOR Newswire is a one-stop shop for the news of the day. Check it out at spacedoutradio.com today.
Hello everyone, this is Ryan Stacy from the Experiencers Support Association, otherwise known as HESA. We're glad to team up with Spaced Out Radio to help investigate your experiences on the SOR Sightline Report. Together, we'll investigate the strange sightings and occurrences you've had. We're looking for answers just like you. So fill out a Sightline Report on the Spaced Out Radio website, and let's figure out what's going on together.
Need that weekend's supernatural fix? Look no further than Spaced Out Saturday, right here at spacedoutradio.com. I'm Stacey Edwards.
And I'm John Edwards. Each Saturday night, Stacey and I are going to bring you the best at paranormal, cryptids, UFOs, you name it, and we're going there.
It's all about the experience and to share the knowledge with all of you.
So tune us in every Saturday night on Spaced Out Saturdays, starting at 9:06 p.m. Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Hello, Space Travelers. It's me again, Carl. Don't forget to join the Space Travelers Club for just $5 a month. And follow Spaced Out Radio on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Our Instagram, Dave Scott SOR. Our Facebook page is Spaced Out Radio Show. Our archives are free at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Come woo it up with Spaced Out Radio today. Bye!
I'm feeling a little spicy tonight. What to do?
Why not get Bumblefuck?
4 million Scoville units of pure hard rock. Bumblefoot hot sauces come in 3 flavors. The burning Bumble. Tone it down a bit with Bumblicious and throw the sauce on everything.
Spice it up. Bumble me, baby. Bumblefoot hot sauce. Get it today at kajans.com.
Okay, we are back. And my goodness, we are another half hour gone into Spaced Out Sunday with my special guest, David Collis. And David, I don't know, but I was thinking during the break that literally you seem to be the Fox Mulder of sacred scripture forensics. You know, when it comes to this whole idea of, I don't know if you remembered that on X-Files. Fox Mulder was
one of my favorite shows.
He was the guy who would come up with those profiles that you're talking about, right?
You know, that's it. You know, and I need my Scully.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. That would be cool. Have a real good looking scriptural expert that could do the geology and all the forensics as well along with you. As I can see the television series right now, traveling to all these different spots where Jesus might have been and learned his craft and his sayings, you know, coming from personal experience. So, gosh, you were on a roll there. We went on a break, and I just kind of, hopefully, maybe you can get back there for us and tell us a little bit about the next steps that you have come up with in developing the profile of this person, Jesus of Nazareth.
Well, let me just go ahead and just add to the types of character traits that he has. And, you know, this is what I did is I had a big whiteboard, and then I just started writing, you know, all these ideas down. And, you know, what is his teachings and what is his methods? And so you really, it was very important for me to recognize, you know, to kind of look deeper into what it is that we see on the surface in the Gospels. And again, I had to put theology aside, so I really didn't want to let that dictate what it is that I see of Jesus. I wanted to put that aside and allow me to look at Jesus for what it is that I'm seeing. So, as I mentioned, you know, Jesus is speaking from personal experiences, and that his sayings tend to be autobiographical. The second, you know, thing is that Jesus is very intimate and he's very familiar with all of his concepts. So he's not the type of person that went and read a book and then he's regurgitating from the book. He doesn't do that. And he seems to be very, very clear as to what he's talking about. So you'll never hear him say, you know, let me think about that for a minute. I'll get back to you. Or let me, I kind of think it's like this. He never says that. Of course, then there's the other side to that too, is that you don't hear him lament like you do when you start reading the Psalms, where, oh my God, why do you have all these people against me and things like that? You know, he's not doing that. So that's one of the things. So the other issue is that Jesus, we're not seeing him as a hypocrite. So he's the type of person that is, he means what he says and he does what he speaks. So he's the type of person that's walking the walk and he's talking the talk, and the two of them are together. So everything in his ministry is show and tell and speak the truth, and you're seeing everything consistent between what he says and what he does. And that ended up, after he died, and the Christians picked this idea up, they personify him as wisdom, because he is both speaking the truth and acting the truth. Jesus was a learned man, as I mentioned. He was a very skilled orator and a storyteller. So he had a way of captivating people just by him telling stories, among other things, right? Jesus was very observant, really, really observant. And he was able to merge his observations with the current situations of his day. And he then combined that with his spiritual knowledge. And then the other thing is Jesus did all these very extraordinary things, and he encouraged us that we too can do the same things.
Yes.
So when you break all that down, it's all in the Gospels. It's just that I kind of compiled it in a way so that we can see it very clearly. That's why I say that, he was very tough, he was very brave, he's very courageous. He's a poet, so he's a wordsmith. I'm an artist, so I kind of understood there's something about the artist personality that he's engaged in. He's flipping tables, so he goes down into the most down to Jerusalem at the most sacred time, at the most sacred ritual, and he's flipping tables. How more brave can you get? And then there's all that righteous indignation that he had. So I just started to look at this and say, boy, what does this tell me about this man if he's doing all of these things? So, and then you have to answer those questions. How would you do it? And when I tell my Christian friends this, well, they just go back and they say, well, he was God. And it's like, well, okay. I don't see it that way, but if that's what you want to revert to, then okay. But to me, it's much more interesting to go down the path that I went down to find out this type of personality and all these character traits and really dig down into the type of person. So now you start recognizing that you can see him aside from all that religious cloak that he's in.
And David, with all of your forensic, you've done an amazing job of taking the scriptures of his sayings and information about him to come up with an idea of what Jesus of Nazareth was really like. Have you come up with any kind of a physical description of what this man might have looked like? How tall was he? Was he a short man? Was he one of those figures that we see, depicted on, wonderful, Easter sayings and those kinds of things in Scripture nowadays? Or was he a different person, do you think?
Well, there are no physical descriptions of him. So there's really no way of determining what he looked like. But when you look at if you look at the Gospels and you look at what he's doing and you look at what he's saying, you can start shaping a type of individual, and you have to start putting him into some type of category. So first of all, everything about him is physical. So he's a carpenter, he's a builder, he's doing things with his hands. And if you go up into the Galilee, you're going to see that he is, he's getting his disciples who are also physically oriented. So fishermen, right? They're having to deal with the climate. They're having to deal with the cold of the water. They're having to deal with, catching fish. And if there's a big catch, hauling in the fish, and you're doing that by hand. These are tough individuals. And the Galilee, once I was able to kind of determine the type of people that seems to inhabit the Galilee, I started realizing that there's an element to them that I would equate to as kind of the Eastern Seaboard. They're kind of tough and they're rugged and they're in your face, and they're constantly kind of criticizing you, or they're putting you down, or they're just not taking anybody's crap. And so we're seeing the same thing with Jesus, that he's constantly confrontational. So there is this element of toughness to him that is also consistent with the physicality of him. So what kind of person would that be? So I would imagine, he's not fat and he doesn't seem to be lazy. And of course, I don't think that there's a lot of fat people there. He doesn't seem to be eating a lot, although I did to kind of determine that, when I analyzed his sayings, what he talked about the most was money. So that was his number one subject. Then the number two subject was food. So there either was very little food that people were eating, or Jesus was the type of person that he really liked food. And I kind of got the sense that Jesus was this type of person that was constantly feeling everything, and he was ultra sensitive to his senses. But again, getting back to the physicality, or getting back to his character traits, this man was extremely brave and courageous. So just imagine at that time, anybody that was really doing things that were out of the ordinary and was threatening to either the peace or to taxation, the Romans would crucify you. They would do something to you. They would, beat you to a pulp, or they would, crucify you or kill you. So Jesus is doing a few things that got him, so to speak, in the radar of the Romans and of the political and the religious establishment. So there's a certain determination to him. So again, we can't determine the type of physicality he had, what he looked like, but here are the types of character traits that he had. And then he had the extraordinary refinement of mind, and he was able to tell these incredible stories, and he came up with very quick responses to those who were attacking him.
Yeah, he seemed to have a very quick wit as well.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of the whole package here.
Yeah.
He was brave and courageous. He was very physical. He had an extraordinarily sharp mind. His heart was open. He was able to perform miracles. And whenever he was confronted, he had a response. He never argued. Here's the thing. He never argued.
Right.
He's not like Paul going up, up to the mountain and then arguing with the Greek philosophers. He doesn't do that.
Very interesting. Is there any evidence that you found of Jesus having a sense of humor?
I think, I think that some of his Kingdom of Heaven sayings were confrontational and a little bit, they had some humor to it. So I think that there might have been some joy in him, and there was probably... I just think that the man was just so vibrant and so electrifying and so open and just so alive that joy and laughter had to have been part of his message and a part of his being. So when he says, the kingdom of heaven is like these children, what would that mean? So I'm trying to think, if he's coming up against children who might be 4, 5, or 6, they're running around and playing and being excited and screaming and carrying on, and they don't have a care in the world, and they're just kind of being as authentic as they can, and we're seeing the same practice with Jesus. Of course, it's more sophisticated, but it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and I can well imagine, Jesus in reality hanging out with, these maybe rough-edged longshoremen, as his disciples, those kinds of characters, Peter being one of them, of course. The idea that he gained their respect somehow and was able to relate to all 12 of these men, I would imagine it would take a little humor in a group like that, just to kind of survive and to probably take a little ribbing every once in a while. Good-natured ribbing, I would imagine, from his colleagues, but being able to, at the same time, demand the respect of a very knowledgeable teacher.
That's correct. And just remember, we hear about the 12, but you read the scriptures carefully, Jesus had 70 disciples.
Yes, isn't that interesting? And so they weren't all...
Exactly. So we're starting to see people admiring him in ways that you have to ask yourself, how does a man who just walks around get a following like that? So he's not sitting in some classroom and he's teaching. He's going to you. He's going to your town, your village, your city, or the mountain near you, and saying all these things and performing these miracles. And, he had to have had everybody just overwhelmed.
Well, it must have been. Of course, this is before television, before advertising, before any kind of mass media. He must have had quite an amazing system of being able to gather the crowds together, to be able to speak with them. In other words, an advance man, some kind of a PR person as well.
Well, if you read the accounts, it seems as though, and some of the parables, it seems as though Jesus knew where he wanted to go, and so he would tell his disciples, go out there first and let people know, gather people in.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to show up.
Exactly.
Tomorrow or the next day. It's in the parables, and it's in what he does, particularly like kind of at the very end, when he asks his disciples when they go to Jerusalem for Passover. He says, go over to so-and-so's house and arrange, the room.
Yeah, right.
And then there's a parable with him where he says, hey, you know what? I invited all these people out, and they didn't come. So why don't you all go out and go get all those people and bring them back, So there seems to be something that Jesus said to his disciples of, go out in front of me, get things going, and then I'm going to show up, and then you bring them to me. There's that kind of mechanism in his ministry. He just doesn't, it doesn't seem to me that he just shows up and he just starts talking on the corner.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
You have to ask yourself, if he's doing the Sermon on the Mount, well, what does he just starts talking on the Sermon on the Mount, and all of a sudden people down in the valley hear him? I don't think so. And then they all just come up to the top of the mountain to listen to him? No, there's had to have been something else going on.
Oh, the idea of, having to, the fishes and the loaves, having so many people there that you run out of food. My gosh, it would have been like a mini Woodstock in some of those events.
Yeah, when you start getting into the level of people, right, on that scale where there's thousands of people, my Lord. So that Jesus had a very skilled marketing sense as well. As an entrepreneur, he knew how to get people's attention. So here's one of the things that I looked at all of these things, and people ask me, like, David, how long did it take you to write the book? Well, it took me 12 months. And then I said, but you have to understand, I spent almost 30 years researching as much material as I can, and I finally got to the point where I can see something that I hadn't been able to see before. So it took that long. Of course, I had to go through and read a lot of material, and I had to study world religions, and I had to travel around the world a lot, and I had to, I did a lot of building too. So I'm kind of like following a little bit in Jesus's footsteps there. So I was able to see something there. But one of the things that I started to recognize is that at the time of Jesus, there were people wanted the Messiah. They were looking for him. And when they asked, they would always walk up to Jesus and say, are you the Messiah? And his response was, who do you think I am? And I asked that question to myself, like, why would he say that? And I understood why he ended up saying that. He wanted to reach as many people as possible, and if he said no, they would walk away, because that's not what they wanted. So Jesus already understood that he had to play a little bit of a game with people to keep them interested in what he had to say. And a lot of the things that he had to say were very obscure and abstract and weird. Like the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Well, just think about, what the kingdom of heaven was supposed to look like. It's supposed to be this grand, expansive, angels, kings and queens and princes and, buildings and sapphires and, the ruby floors, all that kind of stuff. And he's talking about the mustard seed. Well, that had to have been completely peculiar.
Well, exactly. And the fact that, going against the major things that people are being told by the Pharisees and the religious men of their day, Jesus, of course, I think had probably a little bit of lawyer in him as well, being able to know that he wanted to stay away from the actual, admonitions of some of those people, saying if he agreed that he was the Messiah, that would have been quite an amazing thing to say during that period of time, and maybe cut short his ministry as well.
Well, when you read Josephus, one of the things that he talks about is not the lack of people who were saying they were Messiah. It was the fact that there were so many people that were claiming to be Messiahs. It was just the opposite.
Isn't that interesting?
So we are dealing with a very, to me, a really loaded, exciting individual with lots and lots of twists and turns and nooks and crannies in his personality and the way that he thought. So, I mean, he was just really advanced. He's like a genius. And at the same time, he was very physical. So how do you combine these two things together? And he also had a heart of compassion. So he understood how to dig deep into finding kind of the God in the other person, the divine spark in the other person, to recognize that they are, part of God's family. So, yeah, you just really have to, when you break this down and you look at it from the way that I did, you have to just look at Jesus from a new perspective and just go, my God, this guy was just really remarkable.
Oh, my. And indeed, the Josephus material saying that there were others out there preaching, at the same time, and indeed potentially claiming to be the Messiah. And then, of course, as we find out, Jesus seems to stand above all of them as far as at least the Romans were concerned, because they were the ones that picked him out of the crowd and said, this, or the Pharisees, of course, turned him over to the Romans, said, we've got to get rid of this guy. So that's a fascinating forensic review you have done on the life of Jesus of Nazareth. We are almost ready to head into the last hour of our show here on this Easter Sunday, April 12th, 2020. And this has been a very fascinating walk down the history of the Via Dolorosa almost. Feels like you're there when you're talking about these things, David. And we will be right back after this another about 5-minute break we've got here, and then we'll be kind of talking about some of the other things that we want to drill down to on the life of Jesus of Nazareth. We'll be right back.
Hey, space travelers, this is John Resig, founder of the Chive and Chive Charities. If you know anything about our website, you know we like to do things a little differently. We're not some faceless organization collecting money for a nebulous cause. Our donor dollars go directly toward life-improving items. Then we give those items directly to an underdog who needs it most. To become a donor with Spaced Out Radio's official charity, Chive Charities, just go to chivecharities.org/donate.
Are you an experiencer of something strange that can't be explained? Do you want help finding out what's going on? I'm Ryan Stacy, head of the Experiencer Support Association, otherwise known as TESSA. We've teamed up with Spaced Out Radio to investigate cases filled out in the SOR Sightlines report. We are independent and there's no cost to what we do. All we need is your experience. Let's find out what's happening together on the SOR Sightlines report.
We are scouring the world for the most intriguing stories of your day. Take the time to read up on the SOR Newswire, where our team, led by Captain Shirk, will deliver to you some of the best paranormal and supernatural news, along with some stories that will blow your mind from the weird to the wacky. It's the news outside the news that piques interest, and that's what we're looking to deliver to you. The SOR Newswire, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott, and I'm bringing you the Woo every Monday through Friday on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going all out to bring you the strangest, oddest stories and subjects I could find for your entertainment. Why? Because when we hit peak Woo, I know I've done my job. So come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com, 9:06 Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, and together, my friends, we own the night.
The SOR Vault is open for business, and do we have some cool swag for you to pick up? All you have to do is head over to our website and click on the SOR Vault. You have a variety of cool logos to choose from, and put them on anything you want. t-shirts, hoodies, hats, coffee mugs, you name it, we can get it to you. So do your shopping by supporting the store you love. Get your Spaced Out Radio swag at the SOR Vault today.
If you like it hot, real hot, then heat up your meals with Bumblefoot hot sauce.
Get your Bumblefoot hot sauce today. The sauce, Bumblicious, and the 4 million Scoville unit Bumble. We're going in hot, real hot, coming out even hotter.
Keep the milk nearby and tantalize your taste buds tonight.
Bumblefoot hot sauce, available now at kajans.com.
Hello, space travelers. It's me again, Carl. Don't forget to join the Space Travelers Club for just $5 a month and follow Spaced Out Radio on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Our Instagram, Dave Scott SOR. Our Facebook page is Spaced Out Radio Show. Our archives are free at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Come woo it up with Spaced Out Radio today. Bye!
We all know on Spaced Out Radio we love a good beard and mustache, so why not take care of your facial hair with Mighty Moose Beard Oil? Made in Canada, we're taking care of beards and stashes around the world. We use 100% natural ingredients with our oils and balms to make your whiskers feel silky smooth. Use promo code SOR2019 at MightyMooseBeard.com today.
Looking for creative ways to get your company out in the public? How about advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Our sales department is waiting to hear from you, and we can work around any budget. From commercial spots to banners to special promotions, there are many opportunities to get your name and product out to our SOR listeners. For a price guide and more information, please contact us at sales@spacedoutradio.com.
Get your horns up with me on Spaced Out Radio. This is Ron Bumblefoot Thal. Come tune in to SOR where you can hear me rock out with Little Brother Is Watching, the official theme song of Spaced Out Radio. And then come on over to bumblefoot.com where you can find out about my tour schedule, my music, and everything else. Bumblefoot.com keeps you up to date on what I'm doing and the best way to stay in touch with my music and music camps. Sign up for my newsletter at bumblefoot.com and remember, Little Brother Is Watching.
Hi, this is Amber Beckrud, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we store all of the SOR show archives for free. And as an added bonus, every 2 weeks I'm posting brand new content on Cryptid Tales, where I will get into some of the spookier legends and folklore from around the world and tell the stories that go with them. Find us at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio and check out Cryptid Tales today. Drop a comment and let me know what you want to hear. See you there.
For the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. The Space Travelers Club is a place where you can interact with other listeners, either live during the show or on our great forum. We want your stories, pictures, comments, and ideas. You'll get live video streams, exclusive content, and be a part of our newsletter. Stay in touch with everything SOR. The Space Travelers Club is just $5 a month at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey everyone, I'm John Edwards.
And I'm Stacey Edwards. Together we're taking over Saturday nights on Spaced Out Radio, where we're going to bring our own experiences of the paranormal and talk to the best people we can find to help bring you answers to your strange tales.
We're here to entertain your need for weekend woo! So tune us in at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9:06 Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, where we can all get a little spooky together.
Spaced Out Saturday nights right here at spacedoutradio.com.
My heads can feel good. I'm free. I'm remembering who I am. My heads can feel good. I'm free. I'm remembering who I am. My heads can feel good. I'm free. I'm remembering who I am.
Well, welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Sunday. I am your host, Michael W. Hall. Thanks for being with us tonight on this very special Easter Sunday. We welcome back everyone listening in on our terrestrial affiliates, WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia, and UPRN 107.7 FM in New Orleans. On the digital side, we're also on Revolution Radio. And don't forget, you can always check out our archives at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. And do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to some Bumblefoot and shopping at our Spaced Out Radio store and catching up on all the SOR news on the Newswire, and so much more. And tonight we are in our final hour of a fascinating show here on Spaced Out Sunday, Easter Sunday 2020, with my very special guest, David Collis, who has written a fascinating book called Interviewing Jesus. And I tell you what, David, we have really gotten into the flesh of the matter on who this person, Jesus of Nazareth, has been in his lifetime, even before his ministry. So thank you for all of this.
You're welcome. You know, I want to mention that when I finally had put all these pieces together, I ended up starting to shake because I realized that I was looking at the man, and no one had seen him for 2,000 years.
Yes.
So I felt like I was seeing his portrait that we hadn't seen before since 2,000 years ago. So there was kind of a moment there where I went, oh my Lord, this is really remarkable. And I just ended up shaking because I kind of realized that there was truth to what it is that I was seeing.
Oh my. You know, in reality, David, you're right. I mean, we have many, many figures throughout the eons in history that we probably know a lot more about than Jesus of Nazareth. And you've put together the dots to come up with a forensic profile of who he really was.
Yeah, and you know, when I started to do this, that wasn't necessarily the intention, but it ended up, you know, once I started down the path just started to open up, and I just kept walking further along, and new things opened up, and then, you know, new things opened up, and then new things kept on opening up, and I got more and more insights. And with that, boy, it's just like, wow, I'm really seeing something here that is captivating and inspiring, and it's like I'm putting pieces of the puzzle back together, and it was just really, really dynamic, and I just felt like I was in a really an amazing space. And it's, you know, once you enter into those kind of spaces, as you know, it's really hard to want to leave it. But, you know, I ended up having to finish the book, and it was like, God, that's over with. That was an amazing experience on so many levels. And every day I woke up going, God, what else am I going to, write about, and what am I going to see, and what am I going to experience? There was all of this material that I had up front, but as I started to write, then another layer of insights came to me. So, it was kind of a moment of revelation on a daily basis.
Well, that brings up an interesting idea of the fact of inspiration for you as well during this process. It sounds to me you might have had some epiphanies of your own while you were in this process.
Yeah, they piled up. So, in fact, there was many occasions when I would write and be done with the day, and I was exhausted. And then later that night, I'd be going, okay, now I need to, I want to go through this issue, and I want to think about this, and so I was already planning out intuitively the next steps for the next day, right as I was going to bed. And then when I woke up and I would come down stairs and into my office and then start writing, I would read what I had wrote the day before, and there were many times when I said to myself, I don't remember writing any of that.
Oh my.
So that's how deep I got.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can well imagine that. I know just from experience myself writing a few books The idea being that sometimes I would have a clear outline where I thought I would want to go on a certain given day and a certain time I sit down to write on the project. And in some cases, this download just hits you out of the blue. It's almost like the zone, that you get in when you're doing these kinds of creative work, even though it's researched. And all of a sudden, things are coming at you and you're writing things that you had no idea you were going to do just a few moments before.
I found that happening on a daily basis.
I'll bet.
Let me tell you this one story. Okay, so when you read 40 days in the desert, or when you hear about 40 days in the Bible, that's also a euphemism for saying a very long time.
Yeah.
So when I worked on the John the Baptist chapter, and to me that was a very pivotal moment, because John the Baptist is the bridge between Jesus before he starts his ministry and Jesus after his ministry. So when I was working on John the Baptist, we see Jesus getting baptized, and then he's going off into the desert for 40 days without food and water. And I wrote a good portion of that particular chapter, and I looked at the 40 days as a long period, and so I thought, this is like 2 or 3 days, or weeks, or whatever it was, And after I was done writing for the day, I went upstairs and I sat down on the couch, and I was drinking a cup of coffee, and there was a voice that told me, and it was like, you'd think that there was somebody next to me in the on the couch, but no, it was like in my head, and it said, "You got all that wrong. You need to re-examine what that 40 days was really like."
Wow. Yeah.
So then I realized that what happened is a level of sensory deprivation.
Oh, fascinating.
So when you get out into that without food and water, and you are isolating yourself, you're dealing with forms of deprivation. So Jesus now is going through the last phase of his development before he starts his ministry to purge out all those other vices of his.
Fascinating. Yeah. There was definitely a need, obviously, a reason for that whole idea of isolating oneself for a period of time and denying oneself, food and water and those kinds of things. Gosh, there's no parallel at all, but we are, all of us now, experiencing some kind of deprivation of societal contact and those kinds of things during this coronavirus issue that we're going through. There's no way we could even understand what Jesus had to go through to be there, plus be at the same time tempted by the devil, right? Out there in the same time period.
He's being tempted on every level. So we're looking at his vices and how powerful his vices were. So, what tempts you isn't necessarily what tempts me. So when we look to see what Jesus is being tempted by, we also have to go a little deeper and say, these are the things that are really important to him. So we have, one of them is being, are you going to be ruler of the world? And that really that struck a chord with me. It's like, why would Jesus think that he could be the ruler of the world? And then I kind of flipped the table, so to speak, and I thought, well, Jesus thought he can conduct a ministry. And he felt that through his wisdom and through his efforts and his pursuit of a ministry, that he felt that he could actually change his society in a particular manner. Well, how many people think that?
Right.
You have to be really, really you really have to believe in yourself that is something that you're capable of doing. So when I started to really analyze that particular thought and that idea about being tempted, to be ruler of the world. I mean, if somebody said, you can be ruler of the world, I'd go, why? What would I want that for? But, so that wouldn't even come up. But for Jesus, obviously, there was something there. So that's where he thought very highly of himself and what it is that he was capable of doing. And then, of course, food is now part of this equation. So again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, what are all the sayings of Jesus and how many, how often does he talk about money? Well, that's the number one thing that he talks about. Well, the number two thing is food. And so we're going to start seeing a lot of food in Jesus' sayings. So here's food is in the temptation, and we're also seeing food in his Our Father prayer.
Yes.
So we're going to start seeing parallels between the Our Father prayer and the temptations.
Fascinating. And of course, the money issue equates to power as well. So there you go. When he's tempted with ruling the earth, by the devil. Obviously, the whole idea of being very, very rich as well would be one of those issues that he would have to deal with. And you were mentioning the fact that he didn't necessarily come from a very poor family. At least he had some means to travel and be educated. And of course, Joseph of Arimathea was his uncle, a wealthy man as well. And so you wonder, he had probably a little taste of the idea of money and being rich.
He was aware of it. He lived in it. He knew what it did, and he knew how to use it. And then he uses it metaphorically in his parables.
Yes.
So he speaks about, the investment quite a bit. There's one big parable, I can't remember exactly which one it is, and he talks about investment, and it kind of goes like this. The king or the owner of the estate is leaving, and he says to his servants, he says, I'm going to, give you some money, and you tell me what you're going to, and then when I come back, I want you to tell me what you did with it. So he goes away, and he comes back after some time, and he says to the first one, what'd you do with the money I gave you? He says, well, I was so scared of you, I buried it, so here's your money back. And then he looks to the next one, he says, well, what did you do with my money? And he says, oh, well, I invested it, and I got a 10% return. And he looks to the third one, and he says, what'd you do with my money? And he says, oh, I took it out, and I got 100% return on your money. And he says, and then, the man says, you two give your money to the one that, made 100%. So you have to ask yourself, what is Jesus really trying to tell us there with this investment?
Yes.
So again, we're dealing with an entrepreneur who is understanding that you invest, and you invest heavily, and you put it all in, and you put, everything on the line to make this happen, and you're not afraid. So again, Jesus is brave and courageous and fearless, and we see it in his ministry, and even one of his parables is talking about the person who's too afraid to even, do something with the money.
Yes, the parable of the talents. I think that, that always bugged me when I heard that in Sunday school. And it even still bothered me a bit, when I got to be an adult and heard it in certain sermons as well. The way sometimes it can be told is that you feel very badly for the gentleman the servant who decided that he just needed to take care of this money, make sure it was going to not be lost or frittered away, by whoever in the household while he was gone. And you feel bad for that person because literally, in a lot of cases, you would think that maybe that's what I would do,
And then we're looking at Jesus' example. So he gives up this whole side of his life, and he sacrifices himself as a living sacrifice to bring all these new concepts into the world that was in desperate need of new vigor, new understanding, new life. So he was invested 100%, and you see that also with some of his other sayings, in which, if you say, "Come, follow me," and you decide, "Hey, I will, but first let me go, bury my father," or those who are on the plow and they look behind you saying, "Well, what's that over there?" You're not worthy of the work that I'm trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, no, definitely. He needed the commitment for sure.
It was 100% all in.
Yeah, which is fascinating to think. If maybe from the beginning, or at least from the baptism by John the Baptist, did he know the ending was going to happen the way it did, or was that revealed to him later? Did you have any input in that?
I think that he realized that when he started the ministry that there was death was inevitable, because in his particular society at that time, there wasn't. He was going against the grain, and he was directly attacking the religious establishment, but in also a very kind of a soft manner, he was attacking the political establishment. So he knew that what he was doing was going to have consequences, and death was going to be it. And this raises a very fascinating question. There are two. The first one is imagine, Jesus being the cousin of John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is murdered and he's got his head cut off, because the woman Salome did a dance, right, and inspired the king so much that he said, you can have anything. And she says, "I want John the Baptist's head on a platter." And he says, "Well, okay, So you think about what could have happened at that moment with Jesus. Would he have gone and gotten very self-righteous and there's all that anger about killing a prophet? And would he take his disciples and his following, and would they, rise up against the king? And instead, Jesus left and went on his own, and he did something completely different. And I asked myself, had he gone down the road of violence and protest, would he been able to present the Father in the way that he wanted to present it? And his ministry would have been cut short had he gone down that road.
Right. Yes, the whole idea of walking that thin, fine line between the politics of the day and the religious leaders of the day, it almost seemed to me that he took the religious leaders more seriously as a threat than even the Roman government at that point. I don't know. What do you think?
He definitely had an axe to grind with the temple establishment and the Pharisees. And he understood something religiously that I think that those elders and the Sanhedrin and the groups were not willing to go down. And there was something very legalistic about the way they approached religion and authoritarianism that Jesus didn't agree with, even though he had his own authoritative kind of way of doing things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Jesus was a man who was very astute and understood that everything that he did had consequences, so he knew how to hedge his decisions and his bets.
Yes, and indeed, the idea being that if he was rising above the cream of the crop at the time and gathering these massive crowds of followers wherever he went, he would know that he is being, the eye of the needle. The attention is on him big time during that whole 3-year period for sure.
Yes. So, he this is again where this entrepreneur comes in which you are all in, and you are going to be making these very tough decisions, and every decision that you make is going to have consequences. So he was so keen on living the life for the Father, and it is so indicative of why he mentioned and told John's disciples, the Lord's Prayer, God in heaven, your daily bread, lead us not into temptation, forgive, and, glory be to God. He took uncertainty out of his life and his equation at that moment by using the Our Father prayer as a guide, as a pesher.
Yeah. Yeah, and
so he gave himself up as this living sacrifice, and he understood, however things are going to fall, they're going to fall, but I'm going to do all that I can to, make these decisions right. And I'm sure he would constantly go in and say, as he said, or as the Bible, the New Testament would say, that he went out into these quiet and lonely places. So he had a need to get away from everybody so that he can kind of recenter himself and then move forward.
That was quite a unique aspect of his personality, wasn't it? The fact that he did go out and spend a lot of time on his own, contemplating and prayer, and praying so hard at sometimes that he literally prayed with blood coming out of his pores.
So now we're looking at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's pleading, God, please take this cup away from me. I don't really want to, I don't want to drink from it. And yet he's still committed to whatever happens. So when he goes into Jerusalem, there's this moment of decision where he realizes that this is going to be kind of the final moment for him, and he's going to make the most of it. And yet at some point he's kind of pleading with God to take that away from him, but it's not. So he's once you're on the roller coaster ride, you're on it.
Yeah.
There's no stopping.
And just think of that.
And he accepted that. But there are moments, I'm sure there was always moments within the ministry where he probably woke up one morning and would just say, forget it.
Yeah. What am I doing?
Too much. It's too crazy. I'm leaving. I'm going to shut the thing down. But he doesn't.
Right. Exactly. Well, good way to start the next and last half hour of the show here with my guest, David Collis, and the interview that he has done in book form of Jesus of Nazareth. We will be right back on Spaced Out Radio.
Need that weekend supernatural fix? Look no further than Spaced Out Saturday right here at spacedoutradio.com. I'm Stacey Edwards.
And I'm John Edwards. Each Saturday night, Stacey and I are going to bring you the best in paranormal, cryptids, UFOs, you name it, and we're going there.
It's all about the experience and to share the knowledge with all of you.
So tune us in every Saturday night on Spaced Out Saturdays, starting at 9:06 p.m. Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
I'm feeling a little spicy tonight. What to do?
Why not get Bumblefuck?
4 million Scoville units of pure hard rock. Bumblefoot hot sauces come in 3 flavors. The burning Bumble. Tone it down a bit with Bumblicious and throw the sauce on everything.
Spice it up. Bumble me, baby. Bumblefoot hot sauce. Get it today at Kajans.com.
Are you looking for great advertising value for your company? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. We have a multitude of places to get your name out there, including commercial ads during the show, special promotions, and banners on our website. Our audience is proven to support the companies that support our show. We can make your budget work for you. So for more information, please contact us at sales@spacedoutradio.com.
Hey everybody, the SOR Space Travelers is open. For just $5 a month, you can hang out with Dave and our crew privately in our members-only section. With your signing, you'll receive newsletters on what's going on with Spaced Out Radio. You'll have direct contact with the host during the show in our chat, live streaming videos, and a great forum for your posts and more. Become a space traveler now at spacedoutradio.com.
You wanted new SOR gear, and now you can have it. The SOR Vault is fully stocked with t-shirts, hats, hoodies, mugs, and everything in between with great logos for you to choose from. So head on over to spacedoutradio.com, click on the SOR Vault, and go shopping. Pricing is quite affordable, and you can look good representing your favorite show. So go to our website and pick up your new SOR wear at the SOR Vault today.
Are you addicted to the woo? Good. Me too. This is Dave Scott, and you can woo it up with me every Monday through Friday, starting at 9:06 Pacific, 12:06 a.m. Eastern, for 3 hours of great entertainment in the subjects you love. UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, intuition. Yes, we hit it all 5 days a week. Look for us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, my friends, we own the night.
At spacedoutradio.com, we are keeping you up to date on all the news with the SOR Newswire. Captain Shirk leads the team that is bringing you the news of the day and exclusive stories on everything paranormal and supernatural. It's free to read, it's updated daily, and it's right there for you. The SOR Newswire is a one-stop shop for the news of the day. Check it out at spacedoutradio.com today.
Hello everyone, this is Ryan Stacy from the Experiencer Support Association, otherwise known as TESSA. We're glad to team up with Spaced Out Radio to help investigate your experiences on the SOR Sightlines Report. Together, we'll investigate the strange sightings and occurrences you've had. We're looking for answers just like you. So fill out a Sightlines report on the Spaced Out Radio website and let's figure out what's going on together.
Hey Spaced Out Radio fans, it's John Resig, founder of the Chive and Chive Charities. Our goal is to make the life of veterans, first responders, and those with rare medical conditions 10% happier. We do this by donating one grant item, ranging from vans to therapy programs to prosthetic limbs, to those who need it most. To contribute to Spaced Out Radio's official charity, head over to chivecharities.org and become a donor today.
Hello, this is your guitar man, Ron Bumblefoot Thal, and I have to tell you, I love the response I get for Little Brother is Watching from Spaced Out Radio fans. It's amazing how music can inspire and make people think deeper about what's going on in the supernatural world. You can head over to my website, bumblefoot.com, to check out my music, my guitar workshops, my touring, even check out some of the hot sauces that I'm working on. And make sure you keep on listening, because with Spaced Out Radio, you know Little Brother is watching.
From the heartlands of Canada to beards around the world, we know how to take care of you. Fill your follicles with the Mighty Moose Beard Oil. All our oils and balms are handmade and 100% natural ingredients because we care about your beard. And hey, use the promo code SOR2019 and get your Mighty Moose Beard Oil today. You can check us out on our website, mightymoosebeard.com.
We're adding to the entertainment online for Spaced Out Radio. I'm Amber Beckrud, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out Cryptid Tales, where I will take you on a journey into some of the strangest legends and lore from around the world, relaying the stories to you of the strange creatures and experiences that people have had throughout time. You can find Cryptid Tales at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio, and while you're there, don't forget to check out our free archives and leave a comment. See you there.
And we are back here on Spaced Out Sunday with your host, Michael W. Hall, sitting in the captain's chair here for SOR. And my goodness, we have had an amazing blockbuster show here for Easter Sunday, talking with my guest, David Collis, the author of a fascinating study, not just a book, but literally over 30 years of research into the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Boy, we have really fleshed out, I think, David, the historical figure at this point. I'm sure there's things that we haven't been able to pull together from some of your research. Is there anything else we need to kind of get into during this last short period that we have for the show?
Well, there's things that we can talk about when it comes to his philosophy, his spiritual philosophy. I know that when I was looking at his sayings, I noticed that they were easy to hear, but they're very difficult to put into practice. You know, how many people can forgive? How many people can not do not judge? How many people can give the shirt off their back, etc. So Jesus made things very simple for people to, gave them directives, and they seem to be very straightforward and very simple to understand, and yet they're very difficult to practice. And then there was also the other things that Jesus talked about that were easy to hear, but also very difficult to understand. So he was a very complicated individual. So he made it as simple as possible, and he did a lot of show and tell. So when he was showing his disciples what it was like to be having to engage people who are very confrontative, Jesus knew how to diffuse situations very, very quickly. And that wasn't just for him to do that and dispel kind of the atmosphere, but it was also to show his disciples how you don't engage certain things.
I was just going to mention that. Indeed, he was there. Didn't really have a lot of pre-interviews with his disciples, right? He would come up and pretty much decide he was going to ask someone to follow him. I don't know if he had a lot of, pre-knowledge of what they were like and their personalities, but of course, some of them were pretty rough fellows, right? They weren't going to take a lot from anybody, and he literally had to train them.
He had to train them to be disciples and to know how to deal with both the good parts of the ministry and then the bad parts. So Jesus knew how to manage both. So, I grew up at the beach, and I learned how to surf. And there are two things. There's several things you got to know. You got to learn how to be able to ride the wave. At the same time, you need to be able to learn how to manage the wipeout. And Jesus could do both.
Because obviously, if you're a surfer, you realize the wipeout is just part of the whole thing. It's not like you're never going to do that. You're going to do that every single time at one point, and you've got to prepare.
That's right. You have to be prepared for the ride and the wipeout, and you also have to be prepared to, paddle out into the surf. And if it's a really big surf, you gotta manage that. So Jesus is, he's out there surfing these giant waves, and he's managing both the ride and the wipeout at the same time. He knows how to do both.
Yeah. And I can imagine what it would have been like. I have a small group of researchers that help me out with UFO research as well, and cryptids, Bigfoot, and those kinds of things. And I always say sometimes it's like trying to herd cats, trying to keep people going in the same direction and keeping them on track for whatever task you've got ahead of them. I can't imagine, having 12 main disciples and many, many more other disciples and all the politics.
And a whole entourage of women.
Yes. Oh, my. And I can well imagine that Jesus might have been more tolerant of women back in that time compared to some of the disciples.
Yeah, you would be right in that assessment.
And that would have been an interesting thing you mentioned the fact that potentially some of the disciples were very jealous of Mary Magdalene being so close to the teacher herself, and Probably some of them didn't quite like that.
Well, again, you had a patriarchal society, and so Jesus is, again, when Jesus is flipping tables at the temple, just remember, Jesus is already flipping tables way before that. That just happened to be the physical manifestation of the last kind of stage in which he was upset with the temple.
Yeah.
But he was out, flipping proverbial tables all along.
Well, it sure sounds like it.
And so the fact that Jesus incorporated women into his ministry, they were followers, they were helping to support the ministry. And, here we have a story, and I can't remember. I know there's the Gospel of Thomas, but then there's also the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, in which Jesus is showing preference to her.
Yes.
And here's the other key. She understands what he's saying. Whereas when you go back and you look at what Jesus would say to his disciples, invariably they'll come up to him and say, what did you mean by that? Particularly with the sower.
Yes.
And here's the other part. Okay, so now we're going to go back into like Hebrew tradition. And we're going to, think about the particular time that Jesus was in. So these were extraordinarily stressful times. The Romans, there were two things that they were really interested in. One was peace, and the other one was collecting taxes. And so anything that would disrupt collecting taxes and peace, they were very stern about. So if you're out there and you're going to start agitating, they would come in very quickly and dispatch, their legions, their soldiers on you and arrest you and eventually kill you. So, and if you weren't going to pay your taxes, that was, just as bad. And then they taxed everything. So they were taxing, they had a head tax, they had a boat tax, they had a tariff. They had, you'd have to get a permit to take your boat out onto the water. Once you caught fish, then there was another tax for that. So, then there was the temple tax that the priest would charge. So there were temple taxes collectors that were running around, and they were fairly aggressive. So here's Jesus in this very stressful period, and you know what? I'm sorry. I totally forgot what the whole premise was on, what it is that I was trying to get to.
Well, I think it might have been, isn't this true, that Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's?
Yes. So, and again, at that particular moment, when he said that, the priests were trying to catch him in a logical or something illogical or some fault, right? So they were constantly doing that. But anyway, Jesus was kind of involved with the proverbial. This is what I was, talking about. Jesus was involved with the proverbial flipping of tables at every moment. And, here's this one issue where you're dealing with a very stressful period of time with Roman occupation. We have an illegitimate, this is really important, we have an illegitimate political establishment. The King Herod and his family were half Jews and half Arab. Well, that wasn't of a royal bloodline, so that caused problems. And then when you got over to the high priests, they weren't of the bloodline either. So it was the Essenes who believed that only the true sons of Zadok, blood, was what was required, and that wasn't being fulfilled either. So this is a really a very, very trying time, and on many, many levels. And Jesus is coming around and talking about the Father and forgiveness and paying Caesar what is owed to Caesar and forgiving people's sins. And so the other thing is that what Jesus was doing is that he was talking in ways that were very confusing to people. So at this particular time, you would be imagining that somebody who is going to be the Messiah, so the anointed one, well, what kind of anointed one do you want? Well, you have several paradigms. You can have an Abraham type of a figure. You can have a Moses kind of a figure. You have a Noah-like figure. You have a King David type of figure. Or you can have a prophet who's out there, really kind of beating the table and the drum, trying to get people to, turn things around. And yet Jesus doesn't seem to fit any of those models. And not only that, he's not even talking about things. Like at the time, he wasn't reassuring any of his disciples, hey, just remember when the Egyptians were suppressing our ancestors, Moses rose up and, brought him into the promised land. He wasn't telling those stories. And he wasn't telling stories about how David defeated Goliath.
Right.
He was talking about the sower. And he was talking about the kingdom of heaven is like these little children, or leaven and meal, or the strong man, or the mustard seed, or the pearl. I mean, it had to have been completely confusing for these people to be hearing these stories, knowing that here's a man completely immersed in Hebrew traditions, not talking about any of it.
Yes, exactly. That would have been very confusing compared to probably the other preachers and teachers of the time. You would imagine would be doing that, definitely.
Well, you would have had, so we go back to the Maccabeans, and Judas the Maccabean came from the Maccabean family. And at the time, the Greeks, after Alexander the Great had died, then, his entire kingdom was divided up by his generals. And the Seleucid kings that were in Syria were notorious for trying to destroy this old-time religion of the Jews. And, one of the descendants is the one that sacrificed the pig in the Holy of Holies, which is what is referred to as the abomination of abominations. So Judas the Maccabean is the one who rose everybody up to fight against the Greeks, and they defeated them. Well, that's what they were all thinking about.
Right. Fascinating.
And so now it's not happening.
Right. Yeah. Now it's and they're still being
some other territory.
There's
a very different territory here.
And they're still oppressed. Definitely. Yeah. And the foment in the background must have been just tremendous at the time Jesus was preaching as well. I think I would be remiss, David, if I didn't ask you the question, given your forensic studies that you've done on Jesus's life. What is your opinion of the idea of whether Jesus actually married or had children with Mary Magdalene?
It's my conviction that he and Mary were married.
Interesting. Yes, that's something that I've been thinking about as well, of course.
And aside from the mentions in the other Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas and then the Gospel of Mary, I think in the Gospel of Mary, it says that Jesus would kiss her and then you have to fill in the blank.
Yes, I love that, where it's just, there's a blank there.
Yeah, so
in a strategic spot.
The parchment has a hole in it. And then, him taking Mary aside and telling her some of the deeper truths. And, of course, Mary seemed to have been capable of understanding that, which is why he did that. But let me just mention something. When I was reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was something that would come up, and there was the teacher of righteousness, and then there was the wicked priest. And we are seeing something that we're seeing today as well in our politics, and that is the smear campaigns. So you have within these groups those who are with you and then those who are against you, or those who were with you at one point but now no longer are with you. And so there is this smear campaign that is being concocted and pushed out into the world. And we see this in a very kind of a violent and a very aggressive manner. So when we get into the New Testament, there are similar patterns that are occurring in the New Testament Gospels. So we're going to see Paul as kind of an outsider at first, but then he kind of comes back around somewhat to the early Jewish Christians. We're going to see that Jesus is being elevated up into this the divine status, as is his mother. But you're going to start seeing Jesus's other family members, because he had 4 other brothers and he had sisters. There's really no mention of any of them. You never really hear too much about Joseph and what happened to him, other than the fact that he was a righteous man and he went down to Egypt. So within the Gospels, we're seeing something that I found fairly peculiar, and that is there is some members are being elevated and other members are being marginalized or dismissed. So I found this concept of the smear campaign also current within the Christian stories. And I had to ask myself, how come Mary Magdalene is being smeared? Why is she being, was she really a prostitute? Did she really have all these demons? Or is this just the way the Christians wanted to get rid of her and really kind of dismiss her role in the early church movement?
Exactly.
And I feel that there was a smear campaign against Jesus's family and then some other close associates. And so they all got some people got a bad rap, whereas others got elevated into a higher position. Such as Peter being given the title, you're the rock and you're the foundation of the church, you're the father of the church. This is another thing that's really kind of weird and peculiar as well, is that when you break down Jesus's ministry into the nuts and bolts, me being a carpenter, what do we need, a 2x4 here? Is this a 2x6? What size bolts do you need? All that kind of stuff. I looked at all that kind of stuff in Jesus's ministry, and I call it the nuts and bolts. And I was asking myself all these very, very, very particular types of questions, because I wanted to see what things would look like. So I'm trying to imagine if Jesus goes off into, one of the smaller villages today, and then he's going to walk another, 5 miles or 10 miles, and then the following day he's going to be in some other village. How many villages did he, go to that he did, more than once? Was it a lot? Was it few? And every time you went into a small city or a town or a village, how many people would he end up having would follow him in the kind of the manner that he was asking, which is, a full commitment? Maybe there were some that were, they liked what he had to say, but they really just, they weren't fully invested the way that he wanted. So some people followed him. Maybe there were others that didn't. So now you kind of circle around and just say, how many places did Jesus go out and minister to? And then how many people in each one of those areas, what would be the average of people that would accept him or follow him? So I would imagine that number wasn't really big. So Jesus is not creating any church like Paul would have. Paul went to each city and then established his church there. It doesn't seem as though Jesus is doing that.
Yeah.
Because he's asking them to be with him, because it is his ministry, it is his show and tell, and it is his words that people are going to understand who the Father is and how to act in such a way that you are his disciples. When he says to Peter, I'm giving you the church, what church is he talking about? Because if you look backwards, there wasn't any churches that Jesus established during his ministry. At least I don't think he did. So that meant that somebody's putting words in Jesus' mouth, or at least he's, maybe being prophetic about it. But, so Peter is now being elevated to the one who's the father of the church. Well, what happened to the rest of them?
Right. Well, my goodness, this has been an amazing program. The 3 hours of talking about Jesus of Nazareth and the personage that you've come up with your forensic examination of his life and his words. Thank you, David. This has been very enlightening for me, I know, and for our audience as well. Let's make sure that everyone knows how to get a hold of your material and how to find you on the internet or Amazon so that people can get your books and your study materials as well.
Okay, I have my book is on Amazon. And so if you just go to Amazon and you type in Interviewing Jesus, the man, you will, get to my book. So there is a print version of it, there's an ebook version of it, and there's also an audio version of it. And I'm on Facebook, so you can friend me on Facebook. It's David Collis Author. And I also have a website, davidcollis.com.
Well, fascinating. And thank you, David, for doing this very special program on an Easter Sunday. My goodness, this is usually a time where family gathers together and you kind of relax. And here I've put you to work for 3 hours. So thank you for all you've done tonight.
Well, Michael, thank you for letting me be on your show. And it was a pleasure to be able to speak my mind and for you to be able to let me share all of my insights the way that I have been able to.
Well, we will definitely have to do this again. So, David Collis, thank you so very much. Happy Easter to you.
Thank you, and happy Easter to you, and thank you for everybody for listening.
There once was a man who had some land in eastern Washington. On his land, this man, he had a deep, dark hole upon. People came from miles around to throw their trash down in to see how deep the hole was and listen for its end. Then one day, that fateful day, they forced me off his land. They paid him off and sent him on down under with a plan. They hit Mel's hole and covered it up so ne'er it could be found, so no one would ever know what's deep down in Mel's ground. Yippee-yi-yay, yippee-yi-oh. There's no bottom to Mel's hole. So if you chance to find yourself in eastern Washington.
Well, I want to thank you and remind you, everyone, that Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. You can find more information and music at bumblefoot.com. And a special thank goes to everyone listening at home tonight, in your cars, at work, in chat rooms especially, and wherever you are around the world. Remember, the show is currently copyrighted by Spaced Out Radio and SOR Media Ventures Limited. Thanks for sharing your evening with us tonight. And because, my friends, this is Spaced Out Radio, and we own the night. Good night, everyone. Happy Easter. And we will talk to you next Sunday night.